Hey y'all. In this video, we're going to get into a new technique known as rest machining. Now, this is an Aspire only video. The tools needed to use this technique are not available in vCarve Desktop or vCarve Pro. I'm going to be using Aspire version 10.021 in this demonstration. However, this technique also works in older versions of Aspire. Rest machining is a way to carve a 3D file more efficiently. If we look at an example I have here, this boat anchor that is carved in a dish, to get all these fine details in here and on the inside of the circle and down where this part here meets down here, you need a pretty fine bit. But if you go into this with a real tiny bit, carving these large details like this dish or the surfaces of the anchor, this could take a long time to run with a small bit. So rest machining is a way of using a finishing toolpath to carve the large details, then coming along with a smaller bit and just getting the finer details. So let me go ahead and go into a new session of Aspire, and I'll demonstrate the technique. Well, first we're going to need a 3D model. So I'll come over here to the Clip Art tab, and I've gone into the Clip Art folder, and this is the model we're going to be carving right here. It's this anchor in a dish. So I'll double click that to put one out here in the center of my material. Then I'm going to go into my Modeling tab. What I'm going to do is resize this model. We'll make sure link XY is checked, and I'm going to go for a height of 10.5 inches. We'll click Apply. I'll close it, and then with it still selected, I'm going to go ahead and put a vector boundary around the component to be used as a profile cutout. So, pretty straightforward so far. Let me just go into my properties to see what the model height is, and it's 0.3525. We're using 3/4 inch material, so we're fine there. I'll go ahead and close this. Then I'll head over to calculate a finishing toolpath. Now, first things first, I want to go over here into Material Setup, and I want to check to make sure everything is okay here. My material's 3/4 inch thick. I'm Z-zeroing off the material surface. Got 0 gap above the model. My model thickness is just fine. Everything else is okay. We'll go ahead and click OK. Now I can go into my 3D finishing toolpath. And I'm going to hold down Shift and select the vector here. My tool, I'm going to carve this with a standard 1/4 inch ball nose bit. So we've got that selected. We're machining to the selected vector, this oval right here, and I'm going to use a boundary offset of 0.25, the same diameter as my tool. Everything else looks okay. I'm going to call this 3D Finish 1, and we'll calculate the toolpath. With that toolpath calculated, we'll go ahead and preview it. And with our preview completed for this toolpath, we see some of the problems that we're going to clean up using rest machining. Now, the main reason in using that large 1/4-inch bit was to be able to get this dish hogged out and get the basic outline of this anchor, all of these top surfaces carved, in a speedy manner. We don't want to spend all day long carving on this. Now, however, we have all of these milling and machining marks left over by that 1/4-inch bit where it was just too big to get down in there and get real close. And this is where rest machining comes in. We want to calculate a toolpath that's just going to focus on these areas and not recut the whole thing with my smaller tapered ball nose bit. So what we'll do from here without touching anything else is I'm going to go up to the model menu up here in my menu bar, click, and go down here to create component from. And if we look down here on the bottom, we see create component from toolpath preview. This is the tool that's in Aspire only. This tool is not available in vCarve. Now, there are two crucial things that you need to remember when you're using this technique. The first one is, before you click on this selection here in the submenu, hold down the Control key. So I'm holding down the Control key on my keyboard, and I'm clicking Create Component from Toolpath Preview. You may have seen a little blue bar suddenly jump up over here down below, and from all outward appearances, it doesn't look like anything has happened. From here, I'm going to close the preview. We're going to go back over to the Modeling tab, and we see Toolpath Preview has been added to our component tree. Now I'm going to turn off the anchor 3D clip down here so you can see that is the component this is created. When I zoom in, you can see all of the material that was left behind by that 1/4-inch bit is raised in this component. From here, what we're going to do, go back into a straight Z view. I'm going to use the bitmap trace function over here in my drawing tab to trace around these sections so that we can machine them away. Now, I mentioned a couple of crucial points. One was holding down the Control key up here in the model menu. The other is we need to pay attention to our check marks over here. Right now, I have the anchor turned off so that the only thing being displayed is the toolpath preview. We're going to be revisiting this in a few minutes, but make sure you have your anchor turned off at this point. So we'll go over to the Drawing tab, and I'm going to go into Trace Bitmap. We'll go back into the 2D view and look at our bitmap here. Select the bitmap, and we see it goes bright gray. I want to make sure that I'm in black and white over here, and I want to bring my threshold down for the number of colors here. And you'll see what'll happen is that anchor will start to appear. Now, right now I'm dragging with my mouse, but I'm going to let go, and I'm going to instead use my cursor arrow keys down on the keyboard. So I'm using cursor left at the moment, and I'm paying attention out here to how much detail we have. I went too far. You saw how that went white, and I have a little bit of shading on the anchor. I'll bring that back up. So we're at 0.06. I'm going to go ahead and use that to trace my bitmap to get all of this out here included in the tracing. For my corner fit, I'm going 0% loose. I want that all the way to the left because I don't want the blockiness that this is going to create. It's still going to be kind of blocky, but I would rather have smooth corners here. For the noise filter, I'm going to bring my noise filter all the way up. I don't need any areas less than 10 pixels. I'm going to leave the bitmap fading alone, and I'm going to preview. Then I'll come in here and look, and I see I don't quite have enough down here on these ends. So I'll come back up here into my threshold and bring it down. Let's see, bring it back down. Yeah, I can't go any farther down than 6. We're just going to have to work with it. I'll work on these vectors in the editing phase. So we'll go ahead and we'll click Apply. Then we'll close this. Now I want to select these vectors and I want to edit them. So the first thing I'm going to do to get rid of some of this blockiness that we have in here, I'm going to go ahead and click on Fit Curves to Selected Vectors. I'll click on that, and we see all of the points that make up these vectors. Now I'm going to bring my tolerance to about 0.03. I want to try Bezier curves. I do want to keep sharp corners, and I do want to replace the selected vectors. I'll click on Preview, and that simplified those vectors big time. We'll click OK to get out of that. Now I'm going to come down here to the Modeling tab once again. And again, we're going to turn on the anchor, and we're going to switch off the toolpath preview. So all I should have out here now is my main component. Now I want to zoom in down here where we have these two separate vectors. I want to join these. I don't want this to have a missing gap here. So I'll click off. I'll select the vector. I'll type N to go into node editing. And let's see what I want to do here. I want to cut this vector right here, so I'll put my cursor over this and cut vector. Put my cursor here, cut vector. Now I want to cut this vector here, so I'll put my zoom in a little bit, put my cursor over it, cut vector. Now right here, I want to add a point. So I'll insert a point, then I'll cut the vector. So I should have this vector here as a separate piece, and I have this vector here as a separate piece. Now I'm going to delete these separate pieces. So just click on it, tap the delete key. Same here, click on it, tap the delete key. Now I'm going to click on this vector here, and I'm going to drag this out to this point. And the same here. Now I'll click on this vector. I'm going to drag that up, drag this up, kind of turn this around a little bit. And bring these two to meet one another right there. It doesn't have to be beautiful. Now I can tap the letter N to come out of node editing. And with this selected, I'll go back into my drawing tab and I'll join that vector. Then I'll select this one here, and I'll join that vector. Close. And that's taking care of that. This here, I can fix by selecting this one. Go into node editing. I'm going to insert a point, and I'm just going to drag it out beyond this one. So a little bit of creative editing, and we've got it covered. Let me kind of straighten that out. There we go. That looks a little better. Tap the letter N to come out of node editing. Now, you won't always have to do something like that. Usually they will join up, depending upon the artwork. But now we have all of our vectors that surround our anchor. So I'll click off to deselect what I had selected. Now I'm going to come back in and select all of those vectors that surround the model. I'm not selecting either of these ovals out here. Now I'm going to do one last sanity check before I calculate this toolpath. I'm going to make sure my toolpath preview is turned off, and my main component, in this case the anchor, is turned on. Now I'm going to come back over into my Toolpaths tab, and with those vectors selected, now I'm going to do a 3D finishing toolpath. I'll click on 3D finishing, select my bit. I'm going to go with a 1/16 inch tapered ball nose. I'll select that. My machine limit boundary is going to be the selected vectors, these right here. My boundary offset, I'm going to change to the diameter of my bit, which will be 0.0625. I'm not going to change anything else, and I'll call this 3D Finish 2, and we'll calculate that toolpath. And we see now the toolpath that this is going to carve right inside of that traced bitmap. I'll go ahead and preview this toolpath. And we see, when we zoom in, that that small bit came up and cleaned up these fine details up in here and in through here, inside this circle, and on the outside circle here. Now, there are pros and cons to using this method. Some of you may be asking, why go through that extra work when you could just as easily do a single toolpath and carve it with that 1/16 inch bit and be done with it. The number one advantage in this technique is the time savings. I'm going to close my preview, check the toolpaths here. Then I'm going to go over to my example that I showed you earlier. This example was carved using one 3D finishing toolpath using that 1/16 of an inch tapered ball nose. So the entire model was cut with that 1/16 inch ball nose bit. I'm going to close this. I'm going to check the toolpath, and we're going to go up here to Toolpath Summary. And we're going to see that this model would take 5 hours and 20 minutes to cut using that one bit. 5 hours and 20 minutes. Let's go down here to the rest machining example, and with both toolpaths checked, I'll go into Toolpath Summary, 2 hours and 13 minutes, so less than half the time, by allowing that 1/4 inch bit to do most of the work, and then just using that 1/16 inch bit to tidy up the details. That is the main advantage. Less than half the time to carve this one than it took to carve this one. Now, I said there's pros and cons to using it. Let me come out of my summary, uncheck the toolpaths, and go back into my preview. The one disadvantage to using this is, because of the step over of this bit, the 16th inch bit step over is very tiny, so you will notice a difference right here where that 16th of an inch bit did its machining versus out here where the 1/4 inch bit did its machining. You will have this seam around here. Now that can be handled in a couple of ways. You can tighten up the step over on your large bit. In fact, let me look at it and see what my step over is. Okay, my step over is set for 10%. I could bring that down to 7 or 8%. It would add a little bit of time to this toolpath. Or you could work on your sanding and know that you're going to have to sand this final piece. Personally, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I use nylon sanding brushes, and I use the Scotch-Brite radial sanding discs, and I'll put links in the description to the sanding products that I do use, so that you can take a look at what I have or what I use and comparison shop from there. But from a machining time standpoint, the rest machining technique is a major advantage over the standard 3D carving techniques. Let me close this here and go back over into my drawing tab. The crucial things to remember are when you come up into the modeling tab, create component from the toolpath preview. Before you click this menu option, hold down the control key. The other crucial thing to remember is when you go over to calculate your second toolpath, make sure you have toolpath preview turned off and your main component turned on. So, I hope you got something out of this video. I'd like to remind you that today at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, I'll be holding a live Q&A session where we'll discuss the rest machining technique, 3D modeling, 3D finishing toolpaths, or anything else I've discussed in this video. Again, that's noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on my YouTube channel, and I'll put a link to that live Q&A down in the description of this video. We have a pretty good time at these live Q&A sessions, and they're a great reason to go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And when you click that red subscribe button down there, click that little bell right next to it. That's the notification bell. Then click it again and make sure to select all notifications. That way, you'll get a notification every time I post a video and every time I go live. So, I sure hope you'll join us this afternoon, and I hope to see you there. And as always, whether you subscribe to my channel or not, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to watch, and y'all take care.